Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Ian Wingfield. I'm the chair of the committee. And before we start the meeting, I've just got a few housekeeping announcements to make. There are no planned fire alarm tests this evening. So if you hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is the St John's Churchyard of Druid Street. Council security staff will be available to direct you. The public toilets are located off the main reception area. Please switch off your mobile phone to silent whilst in the meeting. This meeting is being live streamed to the Southwark Council YouTube channel. Recording of the meeting will also be available to view once the meeting has concluded. May I remind members to raise your hand if you wish to speak. Please wait until I've given you permission to speak before contributing. Furthermore, when the chair speaks, other members should stop speaking and not interrupt the chair. Members must raise their hands when they wish to speak. Members can ask questions on the issue under discussion. Members can move recommendations on the issue under discussion. Members of the public are welcome to record, screenshot, or tweet the public proceedings of the meeting. And a copy of the Council's protocol for reporting and filming is available on the Council website. Move on to the agenda. Firstly, apologies. I have received apologies from Councillor Martin Seaton and from the Educational Representative Martin Brecknell. Are there any further apologies? No. I have apologies for lateness also from Councillor Richard Leeming. So he should be joining us later on. So just to confirm the voting members of the committee, obviously I've introduced myself. The Vice Chair next, Councillor Van Wiese.
Irina van Wiese, Borough and Bankside.
Thank you. Councillor Abacha.
Evening, Councillor Abacha.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Councillor Cassandra Brown, South Bermondsey Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Evening, Chair. Councillor Chamberlain from Borough and Bankside.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Councillor Foster, Farringdon.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Councillor Johnson, Chaucer Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Newns.
Councillor Morgan Ewan, Village Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Good evening, Chair. I'm Councillor Rose. I'm Dulwich Wood.
Very much. Okay, let's move to item 2 on the agenda. Notification of any items of business which the chair deems urgent. There are no additional late items as such, but we have 2 supplemental agendas. Supplemental number 1 concerns item 5, a progress report on the electrical testing in council homes, and another item 6, the report on governance and oversight of council services. In supplemental agenda number 2, we have the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of November. Can we read those minutes? Agree? Very much. Item 3 is disclosure of interest and dispensations. Does anybody wish to declare any interest or dispensation? No? Thank you very much. Sorry, I took that early for the 27th of November. There's also the 8th of January minutes. Can we agree those as well? Very much. And we've just been joined by Jonathan. Would you just like to introduce and say in what capacity you're here for?
Yes, certainly. Jonathan Clay, parent company, the parent government representative.
Okay, thank you very much. We're just starting item 5, Jonathan. Okay. Okay, so this item, we welcome Councillor Sarah King, been senior for such a long time. Ages, absolutely. The cabinet member for council homes, and the director, Hakeem, there he is, jolly good. Who will be presenting the progress report on electrical testing in council homes. So would you like to kick off, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee.
I was going to say a few words and then obviously hand over to the team to take us through the report that's been provided. Those few words are, and I'll try and keep them short so that there's time for questions. There's been a really significant and comprehensive response to the need to roll out the programme of electrical safety testing. It shouldn't be seen in isolation from the response of the Housing Department to both the deep dive audit that took place earlier in the year, which was the reason we self-referred to the regulator on electrical safety, where it identified that we were falling short in terms of delivering those tests, but also identified other issues such as those around smoke alarms, and also then the findings of the regulator more fundamentally when they made their judgment back in October, I think. Well, the inspection was in August and the judgment was then later in the autumn. So it's important that we see it in the context of that, but I'm conscious that the committee has asked for an update specifically on electrical safety testing. I think we updated the committee at the time that there was a programme that we were putting together that looked at a combination of using our in-house repairs team to be looking at electrical safety testing, as well as looking at going out to contract so that we could have contractors come into that programme as well and make sure that we could be hitting the timelines that we wanted to achieve in terms of getting around the whole borough. It has had some challenges. We have so many homes that we need to be, which we are responsible in all of these health and safety compliance issues, but specifically on electrical safety testing. We've worked through those in quite a lot of detail and are confident about the timescales that we set out. But there have been a couple of the challenges has been around the procurement process of getting contractors in place to do the numbers that we need. But the way in which we've progressed is we're confident we can deliver the timescales, both that we updated the committee on last time and have told the public, but also those that we've shared with the regulator as well.
Thank you, Councillor King, and thank you, committee. Just to add, it's important to state that the council continues to take the health and safety of our tenants very, very seriously. So the electrical tests are continuing, as we've previously informed the committee. Because we've got a lot to do, we're prioritizing some homes ahead of others, in the sense that we're looking at high risk buildings first. So our tall blocks, and we're also because we're aware of where our vulnerable tenants live, we're prioritizing them as well, and tenants who have raised concerns, because when we sent a letter to everyone about the electrical testing, we asked people to contact us if they were concerned about their electrical safety. So we're prioritizing those that have raised concerns as well. We've got two contractors. These details are in the report, obviously, but we've got two contractors that have been doing electrical tests for us for some time. We've been negotiating with them about increasing capacity, and they've now confirmed that they're able to increase their capacity significantly from May. And we're procuring, as Councillor King referred to, 2 additional contractors to support them. Our aim is to have, at the very least, try to access every single home by March 2026. We expect to be in compliance by March 2026. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask a couple of questions before I bring other members in? On paragraph 14, it gives a figure there of 24,256 still needing to be updated. Is that the latest figure, or have we cut that down a bit?
It's important to state that we have significant data issues. We currently, and over a period of years, have used a number of different systems to record the work we're doing around all of our compliance. But we have recently made a decision to move to a system called True Compliance. We've informed the committee previously of this, and set ourselves a much higher standard of data that we would accept. So the figure you see, 24,000, is where even though there are systems telling us that we've carried out electrical tests in those properties, we do not have, what our new standard of acceptance in terms of documentation is. And therefore, we've reduced or lowered our starting position to make sure, that we have absolute guarantee that we test every single home.
So all those that are above, up to the 33,430, you're assured of those. Okay, great. I just wanted to confirm that. The other point you mentioned about vulnerable people being at the top of the queue. Does that include elderly people, or is that just people who might have some?
So, as part of our high-rise building prioritization, we're prioritizing all sheltered housing, for example. But in terms of individuals, we have a list of people that we, for one reason or the other, are aware of their vulnerability. So we're prioritizing them, and then we're prioritizing those who have contacted us to say they have concerns. But we haven't set those priorities in terms of age. It's because of knowledge from by colleagues in housing management of individual vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I mean, I think agree that perhaps those in their 80s and 90s and plus should also be at the front of the queue. So where we have data, where services, wherever it comes from, I think that would be very useful to employ on occasion.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'll take Councillor Rose then, Councillor Bonvise.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of questions. The first one is around, you could explain to the committee what the sort of the three likely outcomes of an inspection would be, and what would be the level of sort of tolerance or contingency within this programme for subsequent works identified by the inspection, just to get a handle from our perspective as to, ideally, the inspector would come in and they could sign off the property and it's just an assurance point and it's documented. But there would be other outcomes potentially through the inspection. So just wanted to know the implications for that, and whether that will be done within, it will then become a housing maintenance job, or it will be a discrete part of this exercise and completed as part of this exercise. And then finally, I'd like to know the way in which you are intending to plan, deliver and evaluate communication as you roll out this programme, and what's the lead-in time for residents ahead of the inspections being done, and then what is the sort of dissemination of information and assurance that it's been completed and signed off, and then they get told when the next level of inspection might be. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. So there are a number of possible outcomes of the inspection. One is a complete sign-off that everything is fine. But considering that some of our properties are quite old, there is a chance that might not be the case, but that is a possibility. The other possibility is that there are remedial actions to take in order to make sure the property is safe. Those remedial actions are then graded into priority, urgent and non-urgent. The contractors we have in place, the agreement we have with them is that whilst they're on site, they deal with the urgent cases immediately. An electrical test can take up to 4 hours, so it's not like a gas check. It's not quick. And whilst they're on site, they've been instructed to remedify any issues they find to be urgent. All the non-urgent ones are then programmed into work, either through our repair service as part of our repairs delivery, or as part of our planned maintenance program. On the question of comes with residents, we wrote a letter to every single resident about the need to do electrical tests in their homes, and describe to them what that entails, and what would happen when we get there, the people who would need to come there. In addition to that, when each individual home is identified, then the contractor writes to them to notify them to agree a date by when it will be done, and describe to them again what would need to be done during that time. Electrical testing is a 5-year cycle. However, because we're doing a lot at the moment, in order to make sure that we don't repeat the heavy duty period in 5 years' time, it is very likely that we will start the process earlier, to spread out the load. So some homes may get their electrical testing ahead of their 5-year cycle. But we're looking to, we're trying to explain all of this to people, because having people take time out, to do the electrical test, we understand, can be an issue for them.
Thank you, Councillor Von Wiese.
Thank you, Chair. I also had two questions. The first one relating to prioritization, and I agree with the Chair that I think elderly people should certainly be prioritized. In terms of those who have raised concerns, I mean, I moved into a council-owned flat 3 years ago, and it wasn't until there was some problem with the kitchen appliances and the wall was opened that it became obvious that there was a serious problem with the wiring being done by some cowboys, God knows when. I would never have known. So I wonder whether, you are actually, maybe you should have more objective criteria in prioritizing, because somebody raising concerns, not necessarily the person most at risk. That was one thing. Does that really work? What about hidden defects? Would, by the way, like additional question, something that isn't visible, so like the bad wiring that was found inside my kitchen wall, would that be tested? Would that become obvious? Because I was told it was quite dangerous. And then if I may just drill down into the numbers for a moment. So originally it was 50% after the self-referral of households not having had an up-to-date test. So that would be around 17,000 homes. But we now know it's 24,000. So that's like 73% of council homes. I mean, I'm not quite sure I follow you with the data problems. Surely you go into somebody's home, you carry out a test according to some standardized checklist, and then you put a little tick against a address. Am I just not seeing the complexity of this, or why is it so difficult to get on top of this data? Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to pick up the data question first. And obviously this is talking very much as a layperson in this space. So the data that we have been really interrogating isn't data related to going into our own test, data that relates to what we hold within the council. So we have systems previously in place where we have different systems which hold different types of data. We have drilled into that data in a much greater degree, and in conjunction with the regulator, we have records that say electrical safety tests have taken place in homes, but we don't hold a certificate that sits with that test. We've taken the decision, if we don't have all of the possible data, we're going to go back and do the electrical safety test again and have a stronger system of data that exists with organisation. So it's about how we manage our own data and manage it, rather than the data that relates to the test itself. So for every test that has now happened, that data will be both. We will both hold the data that we need to hold to have confidence, and that data will be in the system verified by us and also shared with the regulator. Does that help?
Thank you. And on the prioritization, as I said earlier, we have a criteria for prioritization. People who have risk concerns is only one aspect of the criteria. So we know that in our high risk buildings rather than high rise buildings, there are multiple households living in one block. So we're prioritizing those first.
But you're still moving some people up the waiting list because they have raised concerns, rather than because they are, if I understand correctly, they're most at risk. Yeah.
So just to come in on that, when we first wrote to all tenants, we asked tenants that if they had concerns to get in touch with us. So that group of tenants, letter that was sent to them individually and linked to the media in the Southwark News, tenant got in touch with us during that period of time. They had concerns. we also prioritise those people. Now, I'm going to look at a clean slate in terms of numbers. My understanding that the numbers of people who actually got in touch with us was relatively low. So I can think of one piece of casework that came directly to me about someone who had concerns, and I'm conscious that other councillors have their own casework. But the numbers of people who raised personal concerns about the safety of their home in response to that media coverage was relatively low. That we need to get through in terms of. So I am confident that it hasn't jeopardised the long programme to do the electrical safety tests. And so those ones were prioritised by in-house repairs team because they were in place at the time. Them to go and provide reassurance.
No, I don't think we'd want somebody who's already expressed a concern to be waiting another month before. Okay, so I've got Councillor Nunes next.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think this is a distinct question, but so from the process, and I appreciate so basically because you've said that one of the problems the council has is that you don't have the data for what happened previously. So that aside, what are you finding when you are going in and doing the testing? Are you finding that largely electrical infrastructure is intact, is safe, is in an acceptable state, or are you finding that having done the electrical testing, you are having to then commission additional work? So, I mean, generally, what does it feel like? What does it feel like generally across the? I was going to ask another question as well. So, as you know, in my ward in Dulwich Village, there is. We have very few blocks, council blocks. In fact, I think it's fair to say we have about 2. But in general, most of our tenants, council tenants, live in street properties. And in actual fact, recently at the meeting of a residents' association, TRMO on Delaware Crescent, this issue came up, and people were just a little bit baffled that they've received this letter. And I mean, and they've not heard anything. So there was no sense of anyone being remotely concerned about it. But the question was asked, we had this letter, about 6 months ago, more than ago, and we've not heard anything since. So in terms of those street properties, for example, and I'm sure those street properties are as well, and appreciating, that you're prioritising people where, as you say, where you have like sort of lots of families living in a sort of close concentration. But so when are you likely to get around to doing street properties, testing street properties, where the residents have not explicitly expressed concerns to you? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nunes. I'll do the second one first. As I mentioned earlier, our intention is to get to compliance by March 2026. The 2 contractors we have at the moment have confirmed to us that from May they will be able to do about 2,800 homes every month going forward. And as I said, we're looking to procure 2 additional contractors to start in summer. So it won't be long before we get to everybody. But in the meantime, we've got to agree some sort of prioritization, which is what we've discussed previously. On what we're finding, I don't have an immediate answer to that question. But you did ask me what we're feeling. Sometimes I do my job by exception. No one has come to say to me we're finding difficult things, and saying that the money we've allocated, because we've allocated a budget not only to carry out the AICRs, but also to address issues that we're finding whilst we do those tests. I haven't, had anyone raise an issue with me to say our estimates are not accurate. So I can't answer your question affirmatively, but there is nothing coming to me to suggest, that we're finding anything different to what we expect to find or expected to find.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Abacha.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, on the recommendation, I think it's a type error. You have electrical inspection. It report be written as EICR. Might be a type error, I don't know. Then my question is, how will this new structure prevent failures in lack of EICR? And what happens again? Second question is, the 250 million, will it go directly towards electrical compliance and other urgent safety needs?
I'll kick off. So I think the most important thing in terms of where we are with electrical safety testing and the confidence about all of the compliance issues and health and safety issues of home is that the self-referral to the regulator was based on what we described as an audit that's taken place of all of our regulatory requirements and other things within the housing department, and that took place. Which that work started over a year ago, just over a year ago, and it was that piece of work that led us to an electrical safety test. So that deep dive into kind of where we were as a housing department, the condition of our homes, and what work needed to be done to be compliant with the regulator took place. It led to this, but it also uncovered part of that process things like, and we've talked about this previously, the need to have health condition surveys for all of our homes across the borough. We can make very clear investments about what homes are invested. So the foundation work that we need is not to happen again, has happened, in my view, and it has happened throughout last year. That has then been discussed in substantial detail with the regulator as part of the inspection. And overall, we found that the regulator agreed with us on where we had already identified what the challenges ahead for us, including why we self-referred. We are now working very much in partnership with the regulator to demonstrate that we've got the plans in place through our housing investment plan to address all of these in terms of the regulatory judgment. So I do feel that we have, so that is what I hope will give confidence to the committee that this type of issue was uncovered by us as a housing department, and the plans have been put in place to address it, and that as part of that we have also uncovered and identified all the other things that are going forward at this stage. If there was changes in terms of regulatory environment, I'm confident that we might have to repeat things and look at other areas if there were other areas that we needed to look at. But in terms of the health and safety of our homes, the most important piece was uncovering what hadn't happened, what was needed, and what we needed forward, and that exists both for electrical but for all the other.
I could just add to that, Chair. Just to say that the discovery was made through the process Councillor King has described. However, we've also been doing a piece of work to understand the root causes of how we got to where we got to. And that piece of work is to ensure that we don't make the same mistakes in the future to go back to where we were.
That's reassuring to know. It's just sort of quizzed in my mind when you talked about broader report on a stock condition survey. I think it raises a couple of other questions in my mind in terms of it's also an opportunity perhaps for people to alert us to some people who are not identified as being vulnerable. And that also raises the question in terms of our annual tenancy checks. Is that still going on? Because obviously with COVID and one thing and another. And I just wondered, because there's been that lack of human contact. And I just wondered how that is it. Is it on again, and is it working, and do we know what the percentage rate is in terms of successful contact with tenants?
I mean, just to say that the stock condition survey we've commissioned is very, very extensive. It's not just looking at the property, in terms of bricks and mortar. It's looking at the property vis-a-vis the people who live in them. It's looking at the environment, internal within the block and external to the block and estates. We're working with colleagues in public health. to gather information that relates to public health. We're working with colleagues in adult social care. So it's going to be very, very extensive stock condition survey, which will give us information about the people who live in our homes as well.
Well, that's very good to hear.
I was just going to add, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah.
That yes, tenancy checks are taking place. There was absolutely a period of time during COVID and then following it where I think councillors and tenants were raising concerns about the presence of people on their estates. In the last year, I have seen that there has been a clear message throughout the organisation that we want our RSOs, our RSMs, our area managers to be as present on the estates as they can be, and I think that is working quite successfully in terms of picking up repairs issues, communal repairs issues, vulnerabilities, and actually, I think you're absolutely right to raise it. It is one of the reasons that I think not enough issues have been picked up, but I would describe this as very clearly going back to how the working was before, where if your role is engaging with our tenants, then to do that you need to be out with our tenants.
Absolutely right. And, I think it is an opportunity to be holistic. It's not just about electrical things, about, the whole conditions, the risks to the property if they exist, and about the individuals themselves. And also, I think it's, none of us like too many intrusions on our lives, especially at home. So, it sort of nails that down to a specific visit. So I think that's all good. Right, sorry, I digress. Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. The report mentions that there are over 24,000 council homes, which is more than 70% of our council homes are lacking a valid electrical safety certificate. That's more than the regulator reported. And the council has known about the issues with the lack of the EICHR since at least November 2022, when that was reported in a Housing Improvement Board report. So I wanted to ask about, given that the scale and severity of this failure is bigger than what has been reported, why was the issue with the EICHRs not escalated earlier? And can you comment on why the political and officer oversight was not more robust prior to the March 2024 audit? How can residents have an assurance that the new structures that are in place are any more robust and effective? And I appreciate that we are covering that in a later report, but this is about the historical context of how we got to the stage that we're at. And I'd also like to ask about staying on track, because Hakeem, you've tried to give us assurance tonight that we are on track, but 24,000 homes, and an amber rating where we currently are is still very optimistic at best. Have you alerted the regulator of social housing that you now have more properties that we need to have? Right. And what's the plan if the target's missed? What guarantees can you provide to residents and provide that assurance again that they are safe in their homes now, and not just in the
I think the first thing to say, Councillor Chamberlain, is that previously we recorded electrical testing on a particular computer system, and on that system, we still have a high number of homes that have electrical testing. What Councillor King mentioned earlier is accurate in the sense that we haven't been able to locate the certificates for all of those properties. So that's different to we haven't carried out the test. Because the way the tests were recorded on that particular system, there was a process of doing so, which meant that the test would have been carried out before it got recorded on the system. However, as I said earlier, we have set ourselves a higher standard of data acceptance, and we're now saying if all of the documentation are not present, then we are assuming that we haven't done it and we will repeat it. So we don't believe that 70% of our tenants have not had electrical testing, but we're starting from a lower base to give ourselves absolute assurance. And on the question of the regulator, we had a meeting with the regulator on Thursday, and presented them information about the work that we have been doing around EICRs and all the other issues that we identified and they've identified. And in their view, we're moving in the right direction.
with respect, I was asking also for that, why was the process not in place prior to the current regime? Because that's what we as a scrutiny committee should the bonnet of why was the process not there to actually keep certificates for our properties. That seems to me a basic service that the housing department should be providing to make sure that we have got a process to check that all the different certificates are in place and valid. Why was that not the case? Why was that not something that senior officers or cabinet members were highlighting as a serious concern?
So this is the root cause analysis that is now taking place. So we have a new system called True Compliance. You can't circumvent it. You have to make sure that all of the documentation are present before you can confirm that the property is compliant. But what is ongoing to understand, and be able to answer that question, Councillor Chairman. But you are right. One would assume that we should have certificates stored as appropriate.
My second question was sort of asking as well about providing assurance to residents right now, because it is scary. You're feeling at risk in your property that it's not safe, and people's anxiety is heightened. So it's really important that we do provide that as a council, that actually they are safe in these properties. But what are we doing to be more proactive about supporting residents in that?
Thank you. So I think I think someone asked a question earlier about this, which we didn't necessarily answer very fully, is I think there's a really important piece around communications in this, and particularly with our tenants, but also more widely with public residents who also care deeply about our council tenants. That was why when we originally self-referred, we wrote to every tenant. It's why we are looking at setting up to use existing structures that we have for tenant engagement as fully as possible. So members will be aware that we have the Repairs Improvement Board, which is a group of dedicated tenants that we are communicating with on a monthly, 6-weekly basis about how the repair service is improving. It's why we will be establishing a similar board in terms of housing management, where we are currently recruiting tenants to join that board. And I suppose it's quite a fun, for me, that board exists to challenge us to be better in their space and to be a better landlord and to bring their perspectives. And I think that will be a really important part of the process going in terms of understanding their experience as tenants in this space, where, as you just suggested, that people feel unsafe and need that reassurance. So I do see that. But more generally, there is an absolute commitment to communicate more effectively with our tenants and more regularly. So we're looking at a number of different ways in terms of communicating our progress that we're making, both on electrical safety testing, but also more widely in terms of our response to regulatory judgment, understanding not every tenant wants to get involved in a structure within the council. So we're looking at some significant communications work, acknowledging that letter has already gone out and there are updates on the website, but that we keep that a continuous progress. I also think that comms is really important in terms of being transparent, and that's obviously a key requirement of the regulator to be able to be providing very clear updates in terms of where we are, both in terms of letters to tenants, newsletters, and in terms of using the website more effectively as well. So I absolutely think that doing that comms right and that engagement right is the solution to providing the reassurance that, as well as the reassurance of the.
And if I may, I think it also relates to the previous question from Councillor Newlands in regard to the testing that has occurred to date. How many instances that presented a risk and how many didn't. I think all that data would be extremely useful, because if 99% of the examinations that have been done to date have presented no problem at all, then I think people would like to know that. Okay. Yeah. Are there any more questions from members on this item? Okay, so we've got a note of the points that were raised, and we'll list those and send them to you so that everything's covered. And we wish you continued success. Thank you. Don't go away. Okay. Right. Okay, so that's item 5. Let's move on now to item 6. Which is the governance and oversight of housing services. Obviously, we were sort of half touching on that, and there's nobody else for this item. There's just the two of you again. So we have a report which is on page 5 of supplemental agenda number 1. Would you like to talk to that first before we open it up for questions, if that's all right?
Yeah, I will do the same. I'll say a few words and then hand over to Kim. So I'm conscious that I'm going to be repeating myself a little bit in terms of the agenda item that we've just looked at, but also meeting issues that we've discussed previously. I think it is fair to say that in the last year, the housing department has done a significant amount of work. And that has started from really getting into the detail of what we needed to do as a department for our tenants and for our leaseholders, but also in terms of the regulatory requirements that were relatively new to us and that we were preparing for. By doing so, we have really understood, I think, quite forensically what the challenges are in terms of what we need to do and have put in place plans to deliver those improvements that we need in our tenants' homes and more in terms of communal areas of estates. So it has really started with that forensic look at what we must do to be proud of our role as a landlord and to respond to both what tenants need and to what the regulator needs. From that, plans have been put in place, but also we have been looking at how we share that confidence. This links very much back to Councillor Chamberlain's question, the last agenda item, is about how we use all the forms of communication and governance to be able to demonstrate that we are delivering in the way that we should. So there are lots of different elements of that. We have established new governance procedures within the authority, and in particular at the most strategic political end of that is the oversight board that is chaired by Kieran Williams as leader, and with Althea, which I'm conscious you will probably talk to them in more detail about in the next agenda item. It also involves using things like lead member briefings for me so that I can track progress that is being made in terms of our housing investment plan, in terms of response to the regulator and how we are engaging with our tenants. But it also, from my perspective, also means being much more open with our tenants and our leaseholders in terms of what we're doing. So I've talked about how we want to be improving communication, about how we want to be able to be giving really clear information in terms of the progress that we are making. And it's also about respecting and engaging with those tenants who commit a huge amount of time to actually making this better and using those bodies that currently exist and other bodies to best effect. So I'm conscious we've got the report in front of us, but I was keen just to really start with the fact that there has been a significant amount of work. Some of that work has started before my time, and I think that's quite an important thing for me to say, that I wasn't the cabinet member. I've been a cabinet member for just over a year, but some of those changes were coming into place when I was appointed. Things have taken time. It's the most frustrating thing in the world is the time it takes to move a ship tanker. But what we are in a position now is that we have a new strategic director. We've had a new director of housing needs start last week. We have a new director of repairs starting soon. But those changes around skills and expertise have been underway for some time, but they're only kind of coming to fruition now in terms of council being able to meet who is the new senior team in the housing department. So lots has happened. There's lots in the report. I will hand over to him, but I am conscious one of the things that we need to do is really give you confidence that we've responded to the challenges that you have raised throughout the year as well and before then, and also those which have been raised by the tenants and by the.
Okay, just before I bring Hakeem in, I just want to mention that Councillor Richard Leeming has joined the meeting. Good evening. Do you just want to introduce yourself? It's fine, thank you very much. And we've literally just started item 6, the governance and oversight of housing services, the reports on supplemental agenda number 1 for your information. Sorry. Sorry. So I've just been told nobody can listen to a word we're saying. So apparently is there a problem with the feed? It should be okay now. Goodness for that. Sorry, where was I? So Councillor Chamberlain and Councillor Rose, yeah. Thank
Check one. Yeah.
you. So okay? Should be fine now. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Victor. It's not specially rigged when you talk, you understand?
Thank you. So I was going to take the piece about looking at the past and then come back to your point, Councillor Chamberlain, about who's responsible going forward. I'm going to take them in a different order, makes sense. So I think you're absolutely right that the plan, the housing investment plan and the improvement plan in terms of responding to the regulator has clearly identified officers against actions. I think that is right, but the question about whether the political accountability lie, the vast majority of it lies with me as a cabinet member for housing. I think it also lies with the oversight board that we've established, which is chaired by Councillor Williams and involves a group of very senior officers and is attended by myself, Councillor Crine in her role as Finance and Housing Revenue Account, and Councillor Helen Dennis in terms of new homes. But in terms of the space of the housing improvement plan, that is my cabinet role rather than those of others. So in the sense of political accountability, it is to me, and it is about me working with senior officers to put in place a plan to address what we need to do, and then to hold the delivery of that to account. Does that mean we will deliver on every element of it as set out, and it will be as exactly as kind of detailed in that plan at the moment? No, I think there will be things along as we progress where there will be unknowns we haven't accounted for at the moment. There will be issues that arise as we go forward. For example, on electrical safety testing, if people won't allow us into their flats and their homes to undertake those tests, I will be back at the committee to explain that that is a challenge, and we will be taking a group of our tenants to court, which is going to be a really difficult scenario to work through. But are there challenges ahead in terms of the delivery? There are. We are already talking about what some of those challenges are, but we also want to have a plan that puts us in a C2 position as soon as possible. I think in terms of, so yeah, I do see it as my political accountability space. Going back to the past, because I totally understand why the committee is past, as already said, understanding what is here is really, really important. Hakeem mentioned earlier that we're already looking at things around root cause analysis of it, and we are, and it's difficult to give you that detail tonight because it is a work in progress, and my priority was a response to what we needed to do rather than just doing, like, to have just looked back at what had gone wrong and not put a plan in place first for our tenants, in my view, would have been the wrong priority. There is a huge amount we need to do in terms of and how much work we need to do because we just simply have so many homes. And I hope Hakeem feels this, but I really want to hold Hakeem and officers' feet to the fire on delivering on what we do in homes, as well as doing that root cause analysis of how got us here. But I don't think the root cause analysis can take a question over the other. Where I think, which I think is helpful for the committee, is where I think we're further advanced in terms of understanding what some of the issues are, is actually around major works. And that is partly because there are two major works projects that have come to me, and since you tasked us with going away and addressing those failings, there have been several meetings with residents. There has been the work of the Task and Finish group, which is examining what happened and what went wrong. There has been the work of the independent consultant, which is still ongoing. Despite how many times people ask me by email, I haven't got. And then there has also been issues with the and when we reported back on the issue around the concert lake, we started to report back actually about what the learnings were across all of those issues. And I talked a little bit. I'm also conscious I don't want to say what they all are with definite, because I want the actual Task and Finish group work and the Pellings work to actually make their conclusions rather than me second guess their conclusions. But where I think one of the biggest challenges with those projects has been how we have constructed contracts on major works and how we have held contractors to account for major works. And I think they are two areas where it is abundantly clear when we do it better, we can save money and deliver higher quality works and work with our tenants and our leaseholders better, because what the team has done on Consort following it coming has saved £5 million and has demonstrated that when we put in place better contractual arrangements, we can deliver on the wants of our tenants and our leaseholders. So to me, that is a live example of where things had progressed so far on Canada and Devon, they couldn't be put right while in that process. What the Consort estate example shows is that because it was an early stage of starting to learn those lessons, we can take immediate action. Right. Does that make it right? No, it doesn't, but it means that it should never have happened either. But what it's allowed us to do is to be able to turn something around quite quickly, because those lessons are being learned, but they're being learned live. And that's the issue, is that's why I can't give you a comprehensive idea of all of them, is because each of them is a theme that we are developing as we go. But other ones are the quality of the technology that we have within the housing. That point about data, it's not, in my view, a challenge with people holding data. It's about systems holding data. And we didn't have the right technology within the housing department to be holding the data that we needed. A big learning curve for me has been tech related to housing is a massively underinvested technology, if that makes sense, in the sense that the tech companies simply haven't invested in tech housing solutions. There's a lot more going on because it's being demanded of landlords now, but the sector as a whole is catching up, and then we are catching up with it as well. And some of that is because of the regulatory demands being put on us rather than it being done from a bottom-up way. But I think there are lots of themes that I will be able to update you on going forward, but I don't have a comprehensive list of them today because we are learning as we go.
Second question.
Could I, yeah, I think it would be helpful, Sarah, if you could just give us an idea of timescales about when we might get that root cause analysis so that we can come back to that as a committee. But the second question was about the housing improvement plan, because it's good to see that we are starting to see change and positive change. I'm afraid it doesn't sort of necessarily filter through, and I think it comes back to the comms. I think for a lot of people, the trust in the council, particularly around housing, is low, and we do have to go on a journey to regain some trust. But there are still no public milestones, KPIs, reporting of outcomes of how the housing improvement plan is going in the public domain. So what evidence can you provide that transformation is actually happening on the ground for repairs, safety, fairness, and how will you ensure that tenants and leaseholders can see tangible improvements, not just organisational charts?
Thank you. So one of the most important ways to demonstrate it, particularly to tenants, is through tenant satisfaction measures, which are independently collected on a range of factors, which range from whether tenants feel that their home is healthy and safe to how they feel about our role in terms of tackling antisocial behaviour. I am conscious we haven't published this year's yet, but they have come through my LMB process, and once they're verified, I think they'll be published in June. But the tenant satisfaction measures this year compared to last year demonstrate improvement on what I say and think about us. And one of the areas where they particularly identified was the importance that we place on health and safety of their homes, because I believe that's because they are hearing us talk about it rather than necessarily feeling us do it, but it's an important part of the process. So once those tenant satisfaction measures are published, I hope it will give our tenants and the committee some confidence that we're going in the right direction. It isn't like it goes up in several. He might be able to do it off the top of his head in terms of which ones have risen, but I think if I remember right, every tenant satisfaction measure has either gone up or stayed the same. Nothing has gone down. So I think that is the best way of assessing whether we're delivering for our tenants, because so they will come out in June, and the key thing for me is that continues to improve. There are also other measures we can look at. We can look at things around complaints, we can look at inquiries, we can look at timescales for repairs. They are all part of that housing improvement plan, and you're right, we need to publish how we are progressing on it. All of that said, it is going to take time, so I don't want to mislead the committee that it's not going to take a significant amount of time to get to where we are, but that is simply because we have so many homes, and it will take us a long time to get round. Just until we're talking timescales for electrical safety, we're talking timescales for doing stock condition surveys, but we need to get round to all of our homes and all of our tenants to be able to really demonstrate that. Last bit, I do think the boards we're establishing are really important, because I think them being able to challenge us and us be able to communicate how we are responding to that challenge will be the part of the process of.
So just a question about the root cause analysis, about when we can expect.
Sorry. I've been asked if you could use the microphone. Is it a phone now? I take that back. I'm sorry. It's okay.
It's difficult to say, Councillor Chamberlain, because the housing department and the services we offer within the housing department are wide in range and large in scale. We've been looking at compliance at the moment. We have to look at the repair service. We have to look at the homelessness service. There are so many large areas to look at and report on. So, it would be silly of me to sit here and promise you that in 3 months or 6 months' time, we'll be able to bring a report to, on the root cause analysis. But it is work that is taking place, but it's going to take time. And whilst we're doing the root cause analysis, the day job remains. We still have to manage 55,000 homes. We still have to deal with 20,000 households on the waiting list, and the number of people approaching us for homelessness support. So it's a big day-to-day service, and it's the same people that are going to address those things. So I can only ask that the committee gives us some time, to work out how long this might take.
Well, don't worry, we will be coming back to this, don't we? As soon as we possibly can, the other side of the annual account. Yeah. And I've got several members that have indicated, so we'll start with Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we've got scope after you this evening to talk to the Chief Exec and the leader, who are at the top of this very well-constructed, if dense, pyramid of power in terms of information and decision making. So my question fundamentally is, what are the 3 things that you want from the rest of the council that will enable you to get to where you want to be? And so we can put that to them when they come forward to the committee. Because it strikes me that a lot of what you're trying to achieve, whilst you being accountable for it and you being responsible for it in that respect, is also incredibly dependent and interconnected with other council services. So what also struck me was the burden on the lead members' LMB process. And I was just curious to know where within this system would we also be able to accommodate, the multiplicity of sources of information about issues with our housing stock, from estate inspections to whistleblowers through to, members' inquiries, through to call centre logs, through to sort of cabinet member questions. How is that arranged and filtered, and what point are all those potential sources and threads of information combined and assessed and looked at in this new structure of oversights?
There's loads in that. So in terms of wants of the rest of the council, I think the first thing is to explain that some of my wants have absolutely happened in the year that has happened. And some of the biggest priorities I had when I first became the cabinet member was actually around engagement and communication. And from my perspective, I was really kind of acutely aware that, for example, we've had the Streets for People programme. It's involved extensive engagement with residents of the borough. People have got the opportunity to talk about what they want on the road, what they want in their neighbourhood, how they travel. And it felt to me that there were exceptionally good skills in the council, people who are experts in their fields in terms of engaging, consulting and communicating, which existed in certain parts of the council, but not within the housing department. So the change that I have definitely seen in the last year has been having the support of particularly engagement specialists to be working with people like the Repairs Improvement Board, who are involved in subgroups of that work and supporting tenants, who are involved in recruiting more tenants to join the other board, and will in time be involved in the leaseholder one. So it is a work in progress, but I can feel it in terms of where the outcomes are coming through at the moment. I think the biggest challenge, and this is a want, and I think it's probably a want that I can never have delivered, is one of money. I fundamentally don't believe we're in a situation that we're in and we're talking about this because of a lack of money, but more money would allow us to get out of it more quickly. And the ring-fence nature of the housing revenue account is a massive challenge in terms of being able to throw more resource at this. So if we had more money, we could do stock condition surveys more quickly. If that makes sense, if there was capacity in the sector to respond, which I think there would be on stock condition surveys. So but a ring-fence housing revenue account is a really difficult thing to work with in that context. And life is very good at saying you can't spend money in certain ways because of the way in which housing and the rest of our local government work. I think there are some examples we can look at going forward. So one of the things that has also, I think, changed a lot during this year is working jointly with other cabinet members and with other senior officers. So I now regularly meet with the cabinet members community safety. I'm regularly meeting with senior officers in that space to be looking at that whole piece around antisocial behaviour. It is also the case that myself and Councillor McCash, in terms of particularly looking at waste on estates, that is a regular thread of work, which is about improving our work as a landlord. It might not necessarily fit in the regulatory space, but it is looking at creative ways that we can work better together as lead members, that officer teams can be working better together, and that we can be using money more effectively to deliver for our tenants and leaseholders. So continuing those joint departmental and joint cabinet member ways of working, I think is beginning to pay dividends, and is something that I continue.
What I would have dreamt of having, I am getting. I have exceptional support from the chief and my colleagues on CMT. Arona, Cadenhead, has been exceptional in setting up a transformation team, looking at this root cause analysis and doing some other stuff. I have political support, from Councillor King and the leader and cabinet members on the things that we need to do, the difficult decisions that need to be made have been made. And I have, support from my team. There are about 1,200 people also working in housing, and the majority of us, know that we could be better, and people are trying their absolute best to get us to where we need to go. So, I'm in a good place.
Keep that. Councillor Von Wiese.
Thank you. A short question, I hope. Councillor King, you mentioned residents' engagement. Wasn't there a new resident engagement policy that was supposed to be consulted on last month, or did I get that wrong? Has that happened? Is that somewhere to be found? If not, will it happen?
It's a draft resident engagement strategy. It is in draft form. We haven't consulted on it yet. It is coming. I think it's due to come out.
Going out to consultation next month, April.
We look forward in anticipation. Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Foster.
Sorry, Chair. I'll wait for the next section.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on this section before we move to the corporate side of things? I mean, I think we all understand the financial pressures, obviously, in the wake of the Grenfell Tower, fire safety standards, environmental standards that they've all changed, and obviously with the supply costs going up, especially since the Ukraine war. It's all been a perfect storm on that front, and the government had the history of upping the rents at the same time. So there's been less money coming in, and costs have been going up. So it's an enviable position to be in, and appreciate that. But I think the purpose of this session is really that is to understand whether it was just purely that, or whether the structures in place were robust enough and sufficient to meet those demands. And clearly, as I said at the beginning, we need that review that's going ahead. It needs to identify where those problems were, where there was a lack of oversight, particularly with the contracts, as mentioned before, and the processes were, be changed. And I know we're coming on to the transformation agenda, but it's all part and parcel of that process. To give everybody, not just this committee, but as I say, all residents, that confidence and trust in the council that we're doing things the right way for their benefit. Okay, thank you for your time on this item. You can wander away this time. I'm just going to say that I've been told we might, we'll need to take a break so that they can sort out the technology a bit more session. So we'll have about a 5-minute break or so, if that's okay. Very much.
Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check. 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 Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check. Check 1 2. Check. Check. Check.
Seems to be okay. Yes?
Check, check.
Check. Check. Check 1 2. Check 1 2.
Okay, we're all reassembled. So we're moving on to item 7, which is Cabinet Senior Management Strategic Responsibility. So if Chief Executive and the leader would like to come, but the Deputy Chief Executives want to come forward as well, quite happy to, if you wish. Safety in numbers. Okay, well, you can shout from the rear whenever you feel tempted to. Okay, so we haven't got a paper as such, but obviously a lot of this, the discussion around this item emanated from the previous item. I was tempted to sort of run them together because they do overlap somewhat, but because of the reasons that I gave before about, you know, housing being so distinctive and so important to this borough separately to the rest of the council in a way, that, you know, we had to consider the sort of strategic and political management aspects of that separately. But obviously that's not separating it now that you're here. I dare say we will touch upon that as well to a certain extent, because it comes within the overall remit of corporate responsibility. So I think you've heard the previous discussion. Obviously, we've raised this matter in one way or another at previous meetings. I'm sure you've got wind of that in one way or another. But you wish to make a statement first, or wish to take questions? It's entirely in your hands.
Very happy to make a short statement if I may, and I was thinking about the best way to do that first. And I thought in many ways actually it's just to talk about my experience of this council since I've been leader. So as many of you know, I became leader in September. I'm sure you know. Became leader in September 2020. It was in the middle of the pandemic, and in that window, really, my focus, the whole organisation's focus, was on making sure we responded to the needs of our residents. And I think I want to thank everyone involved in that work. And hand on heart, I can say in Southwark, we were up there doing one of the best jobs of that in the country. But it did mean that when we came out of the pandemic, at that point, as we went into the beginning of 2022, there was really the chance to step back and look at, well, where is our council? And where is it as an organisation, and where does it need to go next? And I say, coming out of the pandemic, there was a huge amount just to get council services back on the road again, normal day-to-day council services, after having diverted all that attention to vaccines and testing and humanitarian support and everything else. But also, reality is at that point we were coming out, or still in this long period of austerity, which had obviously had huge impacts on the whole organisation. So really thinking about where the council needed to go next was fundamentally important and the right thing to do at that time. Around about then, so in May 2022, appointed a new chief executive. You personally, Victor, you're involved in that process as well, to help us do that work together. And I think what's fair to say on that is when I looked across the organisation and really had the chance to look across all aspects of it, what I saw, I'm sure you would recognise, was an organisation with huge strengths in many areas. I won't just go on my word for that. I'll look at the independent reviews of that. So one of the things I commissioned right at the beginning was a peer review that actually happened in 2023, but that's the soonest we could line it up. Came out rating the overall council as good, particularly rating our adults and children's services, community safety work, economic development, our work on new council homes, amongst a number of other things that they listed. But of course, any good peer review also highlights the things you need to improve, and I will come back to those really importantly in a minute. And clearly housing was in that list. We've also had other independent assessments of the council. We've had Ofsted coming and rating our children's services good, an independent rating of our youth offending services. We've recently had a peer review of our adult services as well, all of which have come back with very positive results. That's very tangible things. To give some examples, home care, we've seen the satisfaction go from the mid 50% to the mid 90%. Apprenticeships, we are regularly the biggest creator of apprenticeships in the city. On our children's services, we've managed to reduce the number of children coming into care by 19%. Big reduction by supporting families and keeping children safe in their families and homes, when actually the number nationally has been increasing. Youth offending, we've managed to reduce the number of children involved in the youth offending service by 18%. So some huge areas of strength across the organisation, but of course some areas to focus on. And in those, the one that was clearest and centre for me as leader was improving our offer to our tenants and our leaseholders. And to be very clear, one of the greatest strengths of this borough is a quarter of our residents live in a council home. And when you add in our leaseholders, it's 2 in 5 residents. So it's fundamentally important for the people of this borough and for this council more than any other in the country that we do that well. So at the beginning of that process, again, I asked for a much more detailed review of those services and how we should improve them. And that's something that Alfie, as Chief Executive, has been working on from the beginning. That included really looking root and branch across all of those aspects of those services, and a process that started certainly in earnest in 2022. Out of that, as this committee will be well aware, we've had a number of audits that have taken place as a result of that work. And there's some uncomfortable things and difficult things that we've heard as a result of those audits. And I personally have had to write to, and rightly so, to residents to say how we will change our services in response to them. And we've done that communication and set out our plans to improve. On the back of that work, we have put in place a whole work plan to improve how we look after our homes. Brought in a new director, we've heard from earlier, working alongside Sarah King as our cabinet member to drive improvement of that service, building a team that's right for the future of that service. I think it's always important to say all organisations go through change over time, and you've got to have the right team for the job in front of you, not the one that was done previously. And I'm very confident in the team we've built to deliver over the years that come ahead. We, of course, self-referred ourselves on some of the things we found around electrical safety testing, smoke alarms, fire risk assessments to the regulator. As a leader, I have to say it has been incredibly useful to have a regulator with a clear national framework that allows me and all politicians across the country to ask the right questions of their services. So you to make sure you're clear about the things where there's need for improvement. Whilst, of course, I'm not at all in any way content that we've ended up with a C3 rating. It was at least reassuring that the regulator came in and said that they believed we had the right plans to improve and that they had confidence that our plans were fully credible to deliver the kind of improvement that was needed. And so we will carry on that work. We've set out to all tenants and residents our plans to invest £250 million to improve our homes, improving our repair service, as we hear the number one priority of our residents when we speak to them and ask their views. Actually, that is something shared by councils across the country. The regulators themselves, when they've asked that question of social housing tenants, have picked repairs at the top of the list. But obviously to address and make sure our homes are safe in response to the issues we need to, improving our homes, estates, customer service, but also delivering more new homes. As we know from many people living in our council homes, actually, it is overcrowding, it is need for an accessible home, and new homes are just as important for council tenants. And I'll just, to conclude, I'd say, over the last 4.5 years now, my focus has been on building both the political leadership, a really effective cabinet, and I'm very pleased to have one working alongside me, and to make sure that I'm supporting the Chief Executive to build the officer leadership. And I'm very happy that Alfie has been able to build such a strong team with another really excellent strategic director joining us tomorrow, in fact. I also want to say a huge thank you to everyone on OSC. In all those things I've just discussed, and particularly the work around housing, you played a vital part. And the value and quality of the reports coming through from OSC and indeed from the scrutiny subcommissions has really been, I think, exceptional by the standards of councils across the country. Similarly, from the work that audits have done, and equally for ward councillors, and particularly, just to name check a few, certainly the councillors from London Bridge and West Bermondsey, Emily, Sam and Sunil, and those from Rotherhithe, Kath, Bethan and Steph, I think have done an excellent work in making sure the interests of their residents have been represented by this committee and in other ways. And clearly, all councils across the country remain to be fragile. You can't have such a long period of austerity and not end up with fragility. And in that fragility, there are always difficult choices to be made between maintaining investment in the frontline services, stroke maintaining investment in the back office services that sometimes are important to check that everything is being done as it's done. There are some lessons that we will learn, and in fact, one of them is we are building up some of those back office services back up a little bit because we have observed that despite the good intent that was done to keep money at the front line, actually you've got to have some of those checking services in place as well to make sure you have full reassurance. But as we live in a world that we live in today, where currently across the country, 1 in 10 councils have had to go to the government asking for special financial support. In fact, in London, a quarter of councils. It is a very hard time to run a council. They are fragile organisations, but I'm very confident that this council is both got some fantastic services and has a clear improvement journey for the services that need them.
Thank you, Kieran. Althea, did you want to say anything? Right.
Yes, please, Chair. Can you all hear okay? I know there's this mic earlier, so thank you. So thank you, Leader, thank you, Chair. What I wanted to do was take the opportunity to talk a little bit about those essential components of well-run and successful organisations, with a view to using that as a backdrop to some of the conversation that you've been having here and in other places, and we'll be having over the course of this evening about, I suppose, that question, what went wrong or how did things go wrong? And so I don't mean to patronise anyone when I step back over some of these things, but I do think it's important to contextualise this in some really basic dynamics of good organisation. So if we start from, in managing a large business or in large businesses, in fact, in any size business, but particularly in large businesses and large organisations, there are some very basic principles that apply, which is that there must be clarity about the operating context and the operating model. Those people who work in that organisation or those organisations or businesses must be clear about their roles, their job descriptions, their responsibilities, their priorities. They must be clear about their powers that you can express through scheme of management or through their budget delegation, through decision-making powers. The hierarchies and structures must be clear: who supervises who manages who, the role of a manager, a department manager, a service director, a strategic director. And importantly, there must be the performance management systems that measure not just individual performance, but team, departmental, organisational performance, including risks, compliance, use of audits, inspections, etc. So there are those fundamentals, and what has to come together with those fundamentals is a clarity of knowledge and skills, so the know-how. I talked about role clarity and priorities, tools of information and data and equipment and money and premises and resources in people and time and support and feedback and challenge, and all of those things come together. When they come together right, an organisation works well. And when you talk about what went wrong, when we talk about what went wrong, in the example that has been referred to both tonight and on several other occasions, when I say example, I'm talking about this from a macro level as opposed to one specific element, is where there is any set of circumstances where those two sets of dynamics don't meet, there will often be problems and issues. And in the time I've been in Southwark, the leaders have already said, Councillor Williams has said, since May 2022, I've been very deeply involved in our housing service, far more deeply involved in the housing service than I think any of my peer chief executives, either in London or perhaps the country, would say. And so what I saw was overload. There was the combination of huge demands coming in on a daily basis, coupled with a backlog from that post-COVID era. There were people who were struggling with their know-how, tools and ability. There were situations where we have, as you know, for all the reasons that have been discussed, we knew and know that our financial resource was limited, far more limited than we would have liked, through no fault of our own, because in order to address the challenges in housing, that requires the HRA, and it's been well rehearsed, the issues with the HRA. And there were a number of, and so when you bring all those things together, the demands, the overload, the overwhelming nature of the task at hand, with a reduced envelope, with the tools not all being in place, that created a situation where certain things went wrong. And when those things went wrong, they were identified quick. Well, I would say in terms of those factors, for me, it became clear fairly early on what some of those issues were, and therefore the need to strengthen some very core and key aspects of that service. And one of the core aspects of that was people, but it was also about the performance regime, the performance management, the information we were using, and the accountability. Now, none of that is unique to Southwark. I think these are things that other places have experienced, but I want to be honest and say I believe that the clarity that has been brought to the situation and the lessons that have been learned and the structures that are now being put in place will provide the assurance and the confidence that our residents need to see. And you've heard about some of that. Thing that I think is added to that is that that's been done from not just the housing perspective, has already been discussed, but from a whole council perspective. That's some of the change that's been put in place over recent months and years. The one other thing, so I'm sure you want to get onto your questions. I just wanted to touch on some of those, not only the operating context issues, but some of the other changes that are being put in place in the operating model to strengthen how the council's working. So the leaders already mentioned some of this, that we are in probably one of the most challenged times in local government that we are likely to see for some years to come, for a number of reasons. There's the geopolitical context, which I don't need to rehearse for anyone here, but that has a knock-on impact on local government. We know that the financial challenges that are coming over the next 2 to 3 years will be greater than many we've seen before, and that's about the funding settlement and the way that's going to be determined over the coming years. The way in which we work and the shift to prevention, real prevention, brings challenges for us and how we work. We have a number of other areas of, I suppose, change that happen at the same time. Local government reorganisation, although you might not immediately see that as a London issue, it is going to be a London issue and already will be in terms of the changes to the mayoral model. Children's services reforms with a major push to early help, new regulatory standards and organisations, major local, national and NHS reform, and the demands keep coming. Everyone's aware that the demands that we are addressing are not reducing, they're only increasing. So with that all in mind, for me, the important thing, and for Southwark, the important thing is to know we have an operating model that can address, respond to and be proactive in the face of those changes. And that's where the focus has been. So over the last year or two, the work to become a really one council organisation has been intense. You've heard both Councillor King and Hakeem talk about the work that we've been doing to take a one council approach to the challenges in housing. The work to become far more efficient in the way that we use our resources and move away from a federated model of organising and delivering to a truly using the best of all of the council to organising and delivering has become much more our norm. We're reviewing our procurement systems to make those stronger and tighter. So again, it's been mentioned that in a federated system, what happened was there was some departmental strengths, but those strengths weren't necessarily being utilised across the entirety of the council. Moving to a stronger core procurement model, core performance management, which again comes from strengthening the centre, which was a piece of work that started very early on and continues. Reference has been made to our strategy and communities teams, how they've been supporting transformation and change. Reference to our communications function, supporting engagement, and all of those reference to our changing the whole operation of our business resources. So we are operating in a lean and efficient way has all been about being clear about those standards, those priorities, the clarity that we need to be clear on how we focus, where we focus, and how we ensure that performance, the best of Southwark, is being corralled from a corporate perspective and everyone in Southwark understands the priorities. I could say a lot more, and I'm sure it will come out in the course of questions, because what I didn't want to do was to take up all the time with an introductory piece. So perhaps better stop here and give you the opportunity to ask questions that I'll be happy to expand on.
I was really enjoying listening to you. go on for another hour, but no, can I say that was very comprehensive and very detailed and assuring. So thank you very much. Sorry, Kim, did you want to come in? Okay. I know that Councillor Foster was going to ask a question in the previous item, but he wanted to leave it to this, so I'll.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to you both for coming, and it's good to hear from you. I mean, we've talked on this topic a lot, as I know you're aware, and the types of discussions we've had about it, we've also had many times, and it's, I think, very useful for us to have you here to touch on it in a different way. Kieran, you spoke about your record since becoming leader in 2020 of that, and the approach that you took. I think that something that you didn't touch on really is anything that you regretted doing, that we could have done differently, how alternate priorities could have been chosen, or any other approach that you think could have been changed. I think part of the reason we're having this discussion is, of course, because we recognise there are serious failings in the housing department, that we're not in a position to be able to say that we are a good landlord, and that's an ambition that we have to achieve. And I think, although everything that you said about how we ended up here, I think is absolutely right, by not offering a story about our approach, the choices that we have made in power in the council, it's sort of implicitly suggesting that this was always going to be, or this is the best that we could have done, or that the situation, because of austerity and because of COVID, is that with the Labour in power in the council for 14 years, that we were always going to end up in a position where all of the problems that we have seen and discussed many times have come out would have been in place. I think that is, in a way, hard to sustain if we're also saying that while austerity continues and while we still have a very straitened financial situation, we're going to turn it around and end up with a C1 and end up with a housing department that we're all proud of without additional resources. Because it suggests that it is a question of governance and oversight of the departments, that we can take a different approach to effectively turn things around. If we have that power to be able to do that, do you think that we would have always ended up here, or do you think that reflecting on the events that led us here, that there were choices that could have been made differently to result in a different outcome?
I mean, I think no one in any leadership role, whatever levels, would ever suggest that they got everything right all the way through from the beginning, and I certainly don't suggest that personally. And obviously, I've learned a lot about this organisation along the way. Do I think over the time frame that over the last few years we've focused on the right things? Absolutely. So, as I say, coming out of the pandemic, or in the pandemic, we should have been focused on the pandemic. That was the most important issue for residents in our borough by a long way. As we came out of it, I was very clear about the need to identify the areas for improvement across the council, but in particular in housing. At that time, the issue that was clearest to me was the importance to improve the repair service. That's what residents were saying on the doorstep, and that was absolutely our first focus politically, and mine personally. But I also asked for that full review of the service, and only having the evidence from that review, the audits, and the other things, we then identified specific actions where there were, as you say, Sam, these areas where there were failings in the service. You've got to have that evidence base. Do I wish there was a way that we could have found some of those things earlier? Yes, of course I do. Of course, it would have been good to have identified those things earlier. In terms of the broader question about context, look, it is incredibly difficult to deliver high quality services to people when you've got a budget that's been reduced substantially. That's definitely true. That is acutely true for councils across the country. So we're in this current situation where 3/4 of councils across the country that have council housing have had to do one of either reduce the maintenance of their homes, cut back on building new homes, or sell off homes. And that is a terrible context for council housing to be left in across the country, and it's one that's very hard for us. I'm glad to say we're not reducing maintenance, we're increasing it. I'm glad to say that we are still building council homes in a way that very few other people are. Whilst we're selling a very small number of homes where we've got homes that are too expensive to bring back into use, we're investing all that money back into homes, increasing our stock by building more. But if I look back on the things that I regret, I mean, yes, I would have loved for the audits to have happened sooner and for us to found the detail quicker, and of course to have made those changes. That said, quicker. One thing I'm making quicker. That said, do I think the department was also focused on doing other things and doing them in a way that was also important? Yes, and so I've seen lots of evidence of the housing department working hard to improve the lives of our residents in the blocks. You only need to watch that documentary that was based on council housing in our stock to see the amazing work that frontline workers are doing regularly across the estate.
Did you want to add anything?
I didn't actually. I don't know if there was anything particular to add to that. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Foster.
Thanks. In your looking sort of more over a broader period and not necessarily just at the decisions that you've taken since becoming leader, do you think that more political will or focus should have been placed on reforming governance in the housing department before now?
That's a good question. I think hindsight's a great thing, isn't it? I think if you go back to clear thing to say is we held a housing commission in 2012. I think made the decisions on the back of it in 2013, if I remember rightly. That commission came up and said very clearly to the council, you have choices. You could just focus on making your homes better, or you could focus on a bit on making your homes better and on building more homes, or you could focus on making a bit less on making your homes better and build even more homes. We went out of those three options for the building the maximum amount of homes we could route. That's clearly a really important thing to do. We've now got 18,000 families on our waiting list as need has gone up and up. Do I think now we should have maybe gone for a little bit less of the building and a bit more of the quality of homes? Probably yes. At the time, would I have made the same call as the council was made then? Probably yes. With hindsight, I might make a different choice. If I was back there now today, I would probably made the same choices we've made at the time.
I answer that. I think it's one of those areas where governance, the political direction sets the policy, and the operation of the function is one that is directed by the officers who advise the politicians as stipulated in the Constitution, etc. So I do think I know we sometimes use that language almost interchangeably, but I think it is important that we recognise that separation of function, and that ultimately all members are subject to the advice of officers. You can only work with the advice that you're given, and the direction given to officers was direction that came from other officers. So there is, I think, both a political and obviously a strategic managerial responsibility in that space.
I think there's a convergence, isn't there, of two structures. There's a policy side, and then there's a sort of practical, managerial, operational side. And they are distinct, but they do converge at the top, so to speak. And I think the element we're looking at is ensuring that all of that is sort of cascaded down, so that everybody at whatever level. We mentioned this before with housing. Knows exactly. You quite rightly said what the abilities are, what's the ultimate objective that they're working to. So just re-establishing all that in a way. So did you want to come back again?
Just really quickly, Chair, because I think it's a good point. It's an important question because it gets to a big challenge for politicians. As you say, we're dependent on the advice that we receive from officers. And But in terms of, I suppose from a perspective of voters or how we communicate ourselves, we want to be in control of local government and take decisions, to deliver effective services. We don't necessarily go out and say to people, here are our priorities, fingers crossed that the staff are competent to deliver them, you know what I mean? And I think there is a reasonable question about how a political administration does effectively manage senior officers and to get the information that you need in order to hold them accountable and to reform the services. And that's something that perhaps we can get into as part of this conversation. But I think part of why we're having this talk with a more political framework is in order to illuminate this. I mean, you could take a position that as a political administration, you come in and you don't really know what's going on in these services. I mean, which is sort of what you're suggesting, that or you receive advice from officers and you have to trust that they're able to do their jobs. Over time, you may gain a better understanding, and then you can challenge them, and then and so on and so forth. And there's a process around that, but it's not, I suppose, politically satisfactory at all to accept that limitation. But in how you talk about how you solve the problems, you do have to work around that. So it might be something that we get into more. So that's a bit of a waffle. Basically, I think it's an important point to recognise, but I don't think it's really a political excuse for anything.
Come back on. I mean, I think that is why it is so important that as politicians we have a number of ways of what's happening in the organisation. So we have the direct briefing from officers, we have access to audit, we have regulators who do independent assessments and give us views, and of course we go and knock on people's doors and we ask them what their lived experience is of the services that they're providing. And using all of those tools, I talked a moment ago about the fact that we made, as a political administration, improving the repairs service a political priority. That was not based on feedback from people working in the service. It was based on residents on the doorstep saying we want a better repair service. As I said in my introduction, I hugely welcome the regulator for social housing's framework because it just gives a real clarity based on evidence that clever people have done across the country of the things you need to focus on that are the right things to focus on. Having somebody independently come and look at those things is really helpful. However, in this case, actually it was our own internal audit that gave me the answers to say this is the thing we improve, and I'm very glad it did. So all of those things you have to use together. They are all equally important. Although my starting point is actually in the vast majority of cases across this council and others that I've experience of, those other tools, audit, inspect, regulators and others, show that what you're getting is a good briefing from officers. But it is important to not rely on just one of those aspects and have them all.
Chair and Councillor, I didn't mean to suggest that was solely a reliance in that way. It was really just trying to explain or to clarify the expectations that members should reasonably have of officers and their responsibility to serve members appropriately. We are a politically led organisation, and frankly, exactly as you've said, Chair, I'd be very disappointed if the vast majority of officers in this council were not moving in the same direction as the priorities of this council, because there are other places they could work if they didn't subscribe to those priorities. So it was meant to just clarify that rather than suggest it should be something different.
And if I may, I think another point I'd like to make is that we also have the input of our residents at various levels, and Councillor King demonstrated that before with the new structures that we're incorporating. And in other forums, we have a lot of independent people and partners, etc., that participate. So it's not just one piece of advice. You're actually having a whole wealth of advice given you. And the Housing Commission you referred to before was full of independent people not connected with Southwark in any way that came up with those recommendations. Right, sorry, go ahead, Martin. Councillor Chamberlain's next. No, sorry, Councillor Von Pisa.
Thank you, Chair. In light of the one operational question, the operational one is regarding the communication and engagement with residents. And I honestly have to say that whenever I deal with officers in the council, the vast majority are not only professional, they're exceptionally good. You really have to say that. They provide a fantastic service, they're responsive. Very few exceptions. And that is not something I would say for a lot of other big organizations, private and public, that I used to work for. So thank you for this, to you and all the others. Where I think we have a problem is when it comes to the point of delivery of services, and very often the services, of course, not delivered directly by the council, but by intermediaries. So once the intermediaries get involved, and this may be via a public procurement process, which may focus too much on the price rather than the value, I don't know. That is where things break down, such as in the major repair scandals that we've seen, where suddenly there is no more communication, where one hand doesn't know what the other is doing, and that's because it's been outsourced, and then going down a chain of delivery. So the question is this something that we can do better? And if so, how? And is it a question, for example, of doing better communication? I mean, we just had notice from, in your case, in North Bermondsey, where apparently major works were started without any Section 20 consultation. My own building, which is council on scaffold, went up today. I don't know whether to rejoice or to cry, but I certainly didn't know. Huge scaffold, 7 floor scaffolding. No communication. So is that something that we can work on? How to maybe cut out a few of these middlemen and be able to actually communicate with residents before things happen to them? That's the question. The political one is quite different to Kieran, and that is regarding our housing policy. So it seems to me that there was a deliberate policy to privatize council property in the north of the borough, where house prices tend, not everywhere, of course, but land prices tend to be higher, and also allow for more and more commercial development, which doesn't deliver any housing. Take that money and then build social housing where it is cheaper to do so, mostly in the south of the borough. Correct me if I got this wrong, but for me, that leads, I mean, and I understand, of course, the rationale that if you can deliver 2 flats instead of 1 flat, that is a good thing. But it also obviously leads to a redistribution of wealth, to a redistribution of social and socio-economic distribution of the population in our borough. Is that consequence? Does that maybe amount to some form of social engineering? Is that deliberate? Have you projected what that will lead to in 5-10 years' time? Thank you.
Who wants to go first?
I go first? Yep. So no, the short answer to your question. There is no deliberate plan to build a council housing in particular densities in any bit of the borough. We have had a strategy that is about getting maximum value for our residents in building homes, and that strategy has started from fundamentally building on land we already own. As a council, we own a substantial amount of land across the borough. It is one of the biggest costs in building new council homes is the cost of the land. And so we have worked actively with communities across the whole borough. We've asked residents, all ward councillors, everybody else to help us identify sites where we can build. And it is true that we own more land in the middle of the borough because we have bigger council housing estates and other things. And so you're likely to be able to find more land in the centre of the borough. We have also purchased some land to build on. And that land has predominantly been around the Old Kent Road because that's been the area that's got low densities and more opportunity to buy to build. But all of that purely comes from the pragmatic way of working out how can we build the maximum number of homes. And we've got such an imperative to build for people, council homes, rents. Then of course we're going to work out how we can get the best possible value for money. That said, we are building homes across the entire borough, council homes, and the latest ones that we have approved through planning, of course, are at Styles House up near the riverfront.
Thank you. And in response to the questions about the communication and procurement, one, I apologise about the lack of formal communication in that instance. I spoke about procurement in my introduction, and the strength of contract management is one of the things that will assist us to do those things better It happens very well in some parts of the council, which was my reference to a federated model, and not so well in others. And the whole point of bringing that stronger procurement model together is that we've got the best of that contract management approach right across the council and not in any patchy ways. On the communication, again, I spoke about how we're strengthening the centre of the council, and one of those has been the communication and engagement function, precisely to enable us to do that better. That's already improving, but it will continue to. And Councillor King referenced earlier the engagement work that she has appreciated since taking over the portfolio, and that is part of that too.
Okay, thank you. I've got a number of members indicated. Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. And I thought this item was about housing, so I will focus on that. But while we did touch on that, Kieran, you mentioned your role coming in during the pandemic, and I was a backbench opposition councillor during the pandemic, and I have to say, objectively, I thought the way this council handled the pandemic and our subsequent recovery was excellent. And thank you to both of you and to your predecessors for following that, because it was good. But focusing on housing, which I think is the area that we need to focus on tonight. I've heard that this council describe itself as a member-led council, and the committee has welcomed the work that members have been doing on the housing recovery plan and the strategic oversight board. We talked about that tonight. But where was that political oversight and clarity that Althea talked about for good, well-run organisations before the regulator exposed it? Because that's what residents, other members of the council can't see. Do you accept, Kieran, that cabinet members fail to properly scrutinise housing performance? And then who should actually be responsible for that? Because so far it's only officers that have taken the accountability. I appreciate we might disagree on that issue, but one area I do want to sort of pick your brains on and ask you about tonight is how we actually get those thousands of new council homes built, because this council has been doing good work on the Future of Council Housing report. We know that we have to come together, a bit like we did during the pandemic, being united to serve. We have to come together if we're going to get thousands of council homes built. So I wanted to ask how you feel the work that you're doing, or the council's doing, on pushing the new government to actually deliver the 1.5 million homes is going, because so far we haven't seen any of the money or the powers that we need to be able to deliver that here in Southwark. And in the spirit of coming together collectively, what can all councillors, how can all members play their part in helping to deliver thousands more council homes in Southwark?
So thank you. So, and both substantive questions there. So on the first question, so I guess the first thing to say on that is, whilst absolutely the regulators' findings are what they were, in terms of the areas where they said that the council needs to improve its services very clearly and strongly, but it is not the case that those things were first uncovered by the regulator. Just to be clear on that, they were uncovered after audits done by the council and done following political requests to have a review of the council. So we are very clear that we uncovered those things as a result of a political ask to look at a root and branch review of the service, understand what's happening, and raise them. They're also raised jointly, and I want to commend again members of OSC and ward councillors who raised some of these issues with us politically as well. So this is not the case that the regulator came in and told us something we didn't know and found something we didn't know. They came in and said, you've identified the right things you need to address, and we agree that your plans to address them are the right plans and credible plans, as I said at the beginning. But I suppose a more substantive point was, should cabinet members have been looking even harder at the detail of those issues? And I have obviously looked long and hard at that, and I feel very confident that cabinet members were asking very searching questions, and weren't unfortunately given all the details that they should have been given at that time, and that's why we've had to make substantial changes in how those oversight of meeting safety regulatory requirements are done by the organisation. So that's what I say on that one. On the second question about building council homes, obviously, this is something that we have been very determined to lead the way on nationally, not to lead the way nationally, but because in Southwark we need a change in the weather, the climate for building council homes to help us keep building. It's in the interest of all of our residents who are on a waiting list, and that's why we're doing the work. And I absolutely ask everyone to help us work with us on that, and thank you for stating that you would too. So have we seen any improvements since the government came in? Yes, we certainly have. So we've had, not all the solutions we need, let me be clear, but we've had 2.8 billion extra funding for affordable housing. Obviously, that money hasn't reached us yet because it's not got out the doors yet, but that is money that's coming in the near term. We've had some really important changes on some of the rules around the funding we can use. We've had changes on right to buy, which obviously was setting us backwards. So those are fundamental building blocks. But we just need to collectively keep making the case for more investment in truly affordable homes. I'm determined to do that with everybody who's doing that. Our summit, the second council housing summit that we held just weeks ago, had over 200 people there representing over 100 councils plus various other bodies, making that case together with residents, with professional groups, as councils, because we know how important it is.
Great, thank you. I've got Councillor Brown next.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a question mostly for Althea, I think. And I was really struck by the list of principles that you talked about in terms of how an organisation is set up. You mentioned clarity, hierarchy, structures. One thing I didn't hear was values and culture. I'm quite interested in this, given some of the conversations we've been having tonight already about kind of accountability and that relationship between the policy and the operations. And I was thinking about some of the examples I see and hear on the doorstep and speaking to residents of the culture that they experience. And I think one of those is of silos, and that got me thinking about collaboration. Is that a culture that the council has? I often experience emails that get sent to one officer or one department, and then they just come back to you saying, oh, that's not my job. And I think that's the experience of a lot of residents as well. So I'd be interested in hearing a bit more about what the values and the cultures are of this council. Have you set those? What are they? Do you think they're the right values? If not, what should they be? And how are they cascaded amongst the organisation so that everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet and driving behaviours that we want to see to deliver all of these outcomes that we're talking about?
Thank you, Councillor Brown. So when I gave my list at the beginning, I skipped over, I said operating context. I should have been more specific because part of the operating context is absolutely the culture and values. When I came to Southwark, not only was it one of the things that attracted me to Southwark, but it was one of my priorities was that Southwark was talking about a place where we wanted to be out there. We wanted to be not sitting in an ivory tower in Tooley Street issuing diktats from on high, but out there working with our residents, with our communities, with our partners, etc. And so I spent a considerable amount of time doing that, to hear those views, to get that from ward councillors as well. And the overarching message was that there are some, because that was shortly after the pandemic, there was a lot of positive feedback about the way the council had worked during the pandemic, but there was a fear that the council might have been slipping back into its old, not so engaged with our communities and residents' ways. So in terms of values, although there were a set of stated values in existence, and I've mentioned one council before in my introduction, one thing that had to run through all of what the message that I sent, that was coming back to me, that was coming from members, that was coming from everywhere we spoke to, was the importance of one council. Because when I keep using the word federated, it might not be helpful, but exactly as you've described was one of those issues, that people saw themselves identified as this service in this place and not as one body working together to serve our residents and our place. So the new value set that's been being developed has been being built bottom up, from both speaking to our residents, our communities and our partners, but also engaging all staff in a process of defining a set of values that builds on the previously agreed values that were already in existence, and there's nothing wrong with them, but modernises them for the operating context we're in now. And that is extremely important. I didn't pay Hakeem to say some of the things he said, but it's absolutely true. What people have been hearing is a very clear message: one council. People get very direct feedback about emails that say, well, I would have helped you, but I contacted this officer and they weren't around. All of those messages are messages that not only am I sending, but the corporate management team are sending, that these new people who've joined the council are being given as part of their priorities, clarity of role, etc. That's something that I expect everybody to adopt and mirror and enact in the council. And it will take time, and it's there for a lot of people anyway. For some people it's newer, and it's a message that is constantly, I mean, almost to the point of well, I think exhaustion being set, and I mean exhaustion from people hearing it, being said about the expectation of how we work. So there's a lot of work going on to develop that. It will be encapsulated not only in a value set, but in our people plan. It will form part of people's objectives, the expectations for how they work. And really, really, really importantly, it's being tested by tested with the feedback we receive from our residents. So our resident insight survey, from those interactions that happen in an informal way, are all ways from your feedback, are all ways in which we'll understand how we are shifting closer and closer to the goal of being a truly engaged council in that way of working. And of course, it's in our Southwark 2030 strategy. It's one of the overarching principles for how we work with our place and our people. So it's a very important part of what we do. And it's another part of that strengthening the corporate centre around strategy, communities, OD, organisational development, to make sure we've got the backup for the people doing the work to make that a reality.
And that's, I won't add very much, like it's a very comprehensive answer, but the two things I would add is we've been very clear in our recruitment of senior officers, which is where members are involved, so Alfia and our direct reports, about the values of the organisation when we put out our job recruitments and when we go through the process, to make sure we're bringing in people that are going to bring that ethos that we wanted, that Alfia set out so specifically. And absolutely, you know, one of my very strong asks to all cabinet members in their roles is to be asking that question of how our services understanding and meeting the needs of residents and putting residents first, and if they do get things wrong, and services do, developing a culture of apologising and fixing them.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Leamy next.
Thank you both very much for the report so far. My question is not unrelated to what Councillor Brown has just asked. I noted that one of you, I forget which, mentioned that the inability to procure technology was because the technology sector was not necessarily providing housing related software. And I wanted to, in a sense, challenge that, because I'm not an expert on housing related software, but in a sense that this is quite a large level customer relationship management scene. There must be something out there. So I think I wanted to ask whether or not we had the right skills in house to turn to technology to manage some of these things, because that does come up quite a lot in the casework I get. And obviously, given the ward I represent, housing represents a much smaller proportion of my casework than perhaps some other members around this table. But I too get emails where something has just stopped happening because an officer has left the council and not handed it on to anybody, and you find yourself wondering whether or not there's any kind of, departmental records of projects underway which someone might use to hand over to another officer should they leave. So I think there's a key question here around skills to procure and use digital technologies. The second question about partnerships and whether we are working as well as we might, and Kieran might recognise there's a slight pointed question here about with our partners to deliver some of the factors that we have, the challenges that we need to address. And then that also could involve using partnerships to solve some of these technology problems, because the neighbouring council, I know we have the tri-borough, what's it, but there are labouring challenges, and MHCRG runs the local digital partnership, which raises issues about solving technology partnerships. And there was a third question, part of my question, which I've now forgotten when in the lengthy run that's been underway. So if you could answer those first two and I remember my third, I'll maybe come back to it.
Next on.
Just to clarify, I think it was because you were in the room, Councillor King referred to the housing technology.
So So I suppose I think the first thing to say is, whilst there are many landlords in the country, there are not many landlords that are like Southwark Council, just in scale and the type of homes we have and the job we have to do. And so finding IT solutions that work for us is not straightforward, because there's just not a very big market for it. So not that much money for big companies to make selling products to just a small number of organisations around the country. So it is a challenge. That said, I won't say more. There are solutions out there, and we are moving towards doing them. Do we have the capacity to make those changes? Well, I think we've got some very good people that are working for us who've done some great work in improving the council's digital offer. Do we have enough of them? Probably not. But after having all these years of money taken off, it's very hard to have enough. Not least because many other organisations pay a lot more sectors than we do to do the same kind of work. So recruitment is as hard as actually having the posts on the roll. To your second question about systems, it is definitely fair to say that we have work to do as a council to move away in some areas from having a spreadsheet that's held by one officer to having a resilient system that whoever gets sick that week or whatever happens, we can keep hold of information. That is work that the team are now doing, a big piece of work to look at exactly that. Many councils are in that position. There was a way of working that was a leap forward to put things on spreadsheets. That was now quite a long time ago. Now we need to be in a place where we've got them on much more resilient systems. That work is happening, but there's definitely more to do.
Yeah, I completely agree. We are doing one of the things that we're in the middle of doing at the moment. I think you had here at OSC a few months ago, was the work around reprocuring our enterprise resourcing platform, which has been is well in need of reprocurement. I'll leave it at that. And I think so. It comes back to order of priorities, really. Yes, of course, we want to be far more innovative and take advantage of those opportunities that exist. But it's almost that, and you'll understand this, there is a base level that you have to achieve to build on. And one of the reasons why the energy is going into the ERP is because that base level of information about where we are, who we are, where all the data is held needs to be put in place as a starter for 10, so to speak. So it is work that's happening, but we are building, and it's incremental based on where we're starting from. But we absolutely recognise we are not the experts. And what we do have in a place like Southwark is some great opportunities around us in both capital, social capital and technology capital that we can tap into to help us to raise our game in the way in which we use technologies that are now available, including, as I think you spoke about in that meeting, digital AI and all of those other opportunities that we should be able to exploit.
So there was also a bit of your question about partnerships. So yes, we are working both with fellow councils and with neighbouring councils and with other authorities locally to do a long list of things I could go for. Is there more we could do on partnerships? Always. That's one of the reasons why we set out Southwark 2030 strategy, to be really clear collectively, not just what the council's priorities, but what are our borough priorities, so we can consolidate around them, and whether that's working with NHS partners or impact on urban health or the police. We've been really clear about our joint bits of work that we need to do together, and we'll keep doing that. To give one example, which you'll be very aware of, sometimes that's hard when suddenly your partners are asked to rearrange themselves overnight. Makes it more difficult. But I think in Southwark we've got very good partners who are very keen to work with us, and we're making progress.
Then your third question. Okay. Well, you've got time because we've got two more members, so perhaps you might remember them. Councillor News now.
Thank you very much for your presentation so far. My question really also sort of very much follows on from Councillor Brown's words earlier. Southwark Council declared a climate emergency in 2019, and obviously we're all aware that there is a plan that's been produced, which originally put a price tag on that as £3.92 billion. And I'm sure that has gone up considerably since that time. But one of the things that has always been part and parcel of our strategy is the principle that we are supposed to see everything that we do in the council through the prism of the climate emergency. And although obviously there are some fantastic things that have been happening, there is often, and I've seen this really also frequently as in my role as chair of the Environment Scrutiny Commission through the scrutiny work that we've been doing, that there is often a sense that the understanding, and I don't mean a technical understanding of the climate emergency, but the understanding of what we are trying to achieve as a council in terms of addressing our carbon footprint and addressing the climate emergency is not something which is particularly well understood through our through council employees. And I appreciate, it's not so much. I appreciate it's an incredibly difficult task. Obviously, councils are hugely complex organisations with is at sort of all different levels. But I suppose I don't know if you can sort of talk a little bit about what you think has been done to try and achieve that ambition of having staff at all levels engaged in that process and on side with our ambitions to address the climate emergency as we declared in 2019, and what more you think could be done to bring our staff at all levels on board with that. Thank you.
Make a quick start again. I mean, I'd say two things to start with. So one is our workforce is very representative, not entirely, we're working on that, but very representative of society. And in society, there is a mix of people who absolutely see this as the big thing that needs to happen, and people who are less clear about that, I suppose that's the best way to say it. So I think there's a genuine job, as we have with our community, with our staff, to think through, why does this matter? But as you say, the political commitment is very clear, and I personally recognise, I think all of us around this table recognise, that this is not just a nice thing to do for kind of big moral reasons, which it is. It's a vital thing to do for our children and our grandchildren and everyone else that we need to have a safe world to be in Southwark and elsewhere. And when I look across the council, I see bits of the organisation have absolutely got this. And I think probably one of the ones that I think have been most energised of late, our leisure service, our newly brought in house leisure service, have absolutely got the fact that they are a big emitter because of swimming pools, and they've really taken it to heart about, well, what can we do to turn that round and at the same time improve the service while we do it at the same time. And that feels like a really open door with that service, who are quite excited and just managed to get £9 million out of the government to help pay for some of it, so which makes it easier, doesn't it? But Alfie, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that what there is, and I spoke earlier about clarity and priorities and all those things, and I think the danger is where we are not laser-like in the focus on these are the important values that the council holds and we expect everybody to espouse and operate with. And this is part of the work to reset and clarify that set of values, including that this is something that, tackling climate emergency, that fundamentally running through everything we do, is as much and as important a value as working across the council or reducing inequality. And I think to answer the question, what more could we do? I think we can do more to state that. I think we can do more to distill that set of values, including the values around climate, as I say, amongst our other priorities, and describe what that means in terms of how we work, what difference that means we adopt in the way we approach our practice. I think it happens a lot. It happens in, as Kieran's mentioned, some places more than others, but it comes back to being clear with people about what does this mean, what does it look like, what are our expectations, and how we monitor and managing them. So in answer to what we can do more of, we can definitely do more of that. And it means it's not just the responsibility of the climate network, climate staff network, and so on. It's the responsibility of the whole council. So we will do more of that.
Okay, I've got Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for contributions so far. So I think where we've got to this evening, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from the report that's been circulated in advance and the conversations we had with the Strategic Director and the Cabinet Member for Housing, I think you set out in the report, and it made clear that there is a ongoing root cause assessment that's underway that is yet to report, but is identifying what went wrong, when, and how. But in advance of that, some structural changes have been made to housing governance. You have fortified elements of the governance structure to include the Strategic Housing Oversight Board, the Chief Executive's Housing Board, resident engagement boards and tenant forums, and fortified the people within the housing DMTs to report into that at that level. So the inference from that is that the previous structures in the housing context, even if they'd worked properly, probably need to be reinforced and strengthened, and that's a decision you've taken. You've also asserted that you've observed that individuals and their respective roles, and it's not around any deliberate intent, but there was overload, there was a lot of pressure, there was external events, and there was a special context in terms of the size and scale of the housing issues that Southwark faced and continue to face. So that all adds into it when you have that combination with structures that need to be strengthened and those individual pressures. Then you end up in a situation where there's an over-reliance, or you are dependent then on the centre. And we've talked about this here, and we've talked about it in budget scrutiny, around the transformation that's needed, around some of the functional central services that housing has an over-dependence on. So you're talking about the call centre working properly, you're talking about member services and casework, and you're talking about resident engagement and communication, all of which in the housing context at any particular time are important, that need to be sort of emboldened by the council, and in this current context have never been more important. So I think that's a key message from this evening, and something that needs to happen going forward. So fundamentally, it's around all those bits being improved upon, and you being able to demonstrate not only, well, through the director and the cabinet member, but actually this whole council approach, that for the benefit of housing and the cabinet member and the strategic director, that all of those things have also happened. And so that would be the corporate management team at point at this pyramid and moving on. So if there's anything in my summation that you don't agree with, or you are at variance at, it will be good to understand that, and you can let us know that, or you can come back to us. I think we will want to come back to it, and we will begin to scrutinise elements of that because of the nature of the work that we do around budget each year and other things. So that's useful to know your position on that. And then moving forward, I think one thing that's lacking in that structure is the role of the ward councillors. And whilst resident engagement boards and tenant forums are really welcome, I would assume that the transparency of information and data and reporting that you want to get to for that will also help inform ward councillors, because I think the perception at the moment is that only when residents and leaseholders and tenants mobilise themselves in the context of major works was action taken, and when ward councillors have also championed it. So in that sense, political oversight does exist at that local sort of ward level, and it gets picked up and it gets dealt with. And then on the other hand, the safety and regulatory context, we have a regulator now, we have a very complex moving regulatory environment. And it's fair to say that as a council overall, there are some examples of where we've been really good at responding to similar landscapes. So there's no reason why we can't be equally as good in housing, but we need to get there. So that sort of leaves the sort of like the core functions around ensuring that as we move towards more preventative action as a council overall, that actually the necessity to rely on those external factors becomes less, because we are stronger within, and our core functions pick these things up, deal with it, and have the data and information and oversight at the right level and at multiple opportunities to pick those things up. Would that be a fair summary of where we need to get to?
Thank you. There's a lot that's in there. That's exactly right. I suppose the things I would add would be, in any organisation, it's absolutely right that you put in more attention and then ultimately governance around things where you've said that's what we need to get better at. That's what our residents would expect. That's what everyone needs to do. So at the moment, we have put in extra attention and governance around housing because it's the thing that we've set as the #1 improvement priority for the council. At some point in the future, we probably won't need all of that governance. No time soon, just to reassure us. In the short term, we absolutely. So having that extra governance is absolutely the right deliberate choice because this is the area that we most want to drive forward improvement across the whole of the organisation. So that's the first thing I'd say. Second thing I said, and I think I'm saying the same thing, but I just want to clarify. Housing is such a big bit of what Southwark does that it will never just be the housing department that can do it. And so it's absolutely important that it's seen as a big priority, and at the moment, given that it's our top priority to improve, the top priority for our IT team, for our HR team, for our call centre, for our finance team, all of those things, because it's a collective task. And even if everything were going swimmingly well, it still would be because of the scale of our housing function. You couldn't just have a kind of mini version of all those things in housing. It's such a big thing for us. So this shift from being a federated council, Althea, to being one that really does things in the round. I mean, it's true of lots of things, but it's true in spades for housing, because given the nature of it. And in terms of the ability of residents to affect change, that's fundamentally the most important thing. You know, people will be able to say what their experience is and have change on the back of that. So what are we doing about that? I think is a really important question. The first thing to say is we are evidencing that we're making change. Satisfaction with repairs is going up. Residents told us they wanted a better service, making the service better. We're now above the industry average, but residents tell they want it even better, so we're going to make it even better. We're focusing on doing that. That's really important. The second thing is, I'll say a bit more about this, but I've been very clear, as has Sarah, to the housing department and the wider customer service department that we need to get better at dealing with complaints when things go wrong, but more importantly, we need to learn from those complaints and be able to evidence how we've learned from those complaints and what's changed as a result of them. And then the third thing is the work we're now doing that you mentioned, which is about making sure that we don't just have good engagement structures in so much as lots of people are engaged with them, but we have structures where we can show to ourselves and to residents that issues were raised, and as a result of that, something changed. And that we are communicating consistently, and as we will be, to residents. You said this is what we've done, this is what we're going to do next. And we need to be able to keep evidencing that change. So we have examples, but we need to be more systematic at the moment. Because one of the things the regulator said to us when they came, these structures are interesting on paper, but we're struggling to find what happened as a result. I think the residents said in those meetings.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Rose, for that summation. If you could just put that into a report for me, that would be really appreciated. Thank you. No, yeah, absolutely right. I would. The things I would add is, and the cautionary note here is that what we don't want to do is create a behemoth of governance and meetings and boards that spend all their time scrutinising things and not actually doing the job of work that we want them to do. So I think keeping that balance is really important. So the add-on is to what end? You know, we've always got to really, and what difference has it made and how do we know? So absolutely yes, but the to what end has always got to be paramount in that. And the other side of that is that I talked about performance information and being better at understanding our performance information, so that what we wouldn't want is to end up having this conversation in 5 years' time where we've got a C1 housing function with a brilliant landlord and all of those things are great, and some other service has fallen off a cliff because we've put all our attention here and we haven't done that. So absolutely yes, but that information and that performance data and evidence has got to be something we're affecting across the entirety of the council. It's already there in many parts, but it's just making sure we keep that balance of those. And as Kieran has said, that learning from complaints, which comes back to not having a silo approach, so that when we are receiving complaints, we're doing the join up and we're working out, well, why are we getting this noise in this place about this thing, rather than just responding to that individual email. So, but yes, absolutely the right summation. And again, thank you. If you could just send that across to me, that'd be great.
One thing I'd add, which is partly in response to a number of questions, and this is not about which is not an excuse for where we are, but I think it's just important for us all to be eyes open about the scale of the challenge we face. So the truth is, big social landlords across the whole country are struggling. And you look at the findings of the regulator, you're seeing that the biggest group of landlords are coming out the same place as us, C3. You look at the news on any given day and you'll see stories up and down the country of things that shouldn't have happened from various landlords. The sector is struggling. And so for us in improving, we are working in a world where when you go out to recruitment, people are coming from other organisations that are struggling. When you go and say, what does a fantastic repair service look like? You struggle to find anyone who's got a fantastic repair service. And so it's all difficult work to do. The good news, I think, though, to probably go back to your question at the beginning, Sam, is the country has woken up to that. And I see, and all the work we've been doing on the work with fellow councils and the future of council housing, I see a real determination across the sector to change that. So we are now talking about very actively with the Department and MHCLG about setting up a network of directors of housing equivalent to the ones that exist for children's and adult services. Why do I say that's important? Not just a network of directors, that's lovely, but not important, because they were fundamental, those two things, in driving what has been a national revolution in social work that happened over the last couple of decades as well. And I think our mindset for all of us needs to be about that. There's a need for new professional standards, new professionalisation, new vision of what it is to work in housing, skilling up the workforce in our borough or in the country, changing our expectations of what it is to be a good landlord. I'm very determined, I know Sarah is, I know Alfia is, that we are at the forefront of changing that. I'm also under no illusions that there's a huge job to do in order to do it. But I think the national mood is heading in that direction as well, and that helps us in the journey.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. I think Councillor Rose is in the wrong vocation. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you. I mean, obviously, I think we're all aware that we live in a world which is constantly evolving. We know that events impact us and then change direction here and there. I mean, for instance, we had the drop in schools intake, which obviously nobody could predict beforehand. But in the meantime, we can build organisational resilience, which Alfia, what you're trying to get at. I also think that you've heard this evening from members in their questions, in their comments, and the issues they've raised, and I think they do reflect really what our residents, our tenants, and leaseholders, their concerns. But in many ways, it also reflects your own ambitions for this organisation. So I don't think we're at loggerheads when it comes to that. It is about restoring public faith and public trust and confidence in the borough and how it's run, and ensuring that we've got that sufficient oversight, both on a policy and material basis. And as you say, Kieran, there's lots in comparison with other councils that are facing financial hardships. There's lots to be proud of in this borough. There's lots that we've achieved and can go on achieving against the reality and the backdrop of all difficulties within local government. So thank you once again, and I hope you didn't get too much of a grilling, and we look forward to seeing you the other side of the annual council, when we'll have more opportunities to raise these matters. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Okay, we've got one more item left on the agenda, which is the work programme. As you know, this side of the annual council, we've just got the one meeting now, which is on the 7th of May. As you can see, we've got 4, it's on page 19 of the agenda. As you can see, we've got the Canada Water Estate and Devon Mansions Major Works review, final report coming back to us. We've got the Delivering Southwark 2030 Council Ambitions and Commitments, the Climate Change Strategy Performance, and the refresh of the procurement framework to support Southwark 2030. So we've got quite a few meaty items to get stuck into on the 7th of May. So can that be noted, please? And obviously we can't set anything else until we know who we are and what we are come the annual council. But I'll see you all on the 7th of May, and thank you once again for all your participation tonight. Thank you.